where the big majority of working people belongs, the informal economy. And there we will treat two problems. First, we will look on the possibilities of collectivization and collective bargaining. And secondly, we will look on the impact of technological innovations on the informal economy. And then we will go on and we will analyze the working poor phenomenon in Latin America. And finally, we will go to Japan to see how the traditional pattern of lifelong employment in Japan is replaced by much more fluid structures on the labor market. As you can see, a very exciting and ambitious program. Our first, I should say that I asked my speakers to not exceed 15 minutes. And I'm a very cool person. You see, I have yellow cards and I have red cards. So you'll see. I do this because I want to make sure that we have afterwards enough time for discussion. So the first speaker will be Evans Kalula. Evans Kalula is from the University of Cape Town, but of course, he's much more. He is a bit everywhere, and he is chairing one of the most important bodies of the ILO, namely the Committee on Freedom of Association. And he will talk about the collective side of informal economy. Evans, the floor is yours, 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Let me start. Good afternoon, everybody. It's afternoon here in Cape Town, and eat your hearts out. It's sunny, Mediterranean summer, and when it's like this in Cape Town, it's paradise on earth. So I feel for you. Having said that, I'm sorry I can't be with you. I would like to thank the organizers for including me in this work, and particularly my friend and mentor, Dr. Manfred Weiss. Professor Dr. Manfred Weiss and I go back a long way, since we met in 1983 when he discovered me I should say that, in Zambia. And he has been not only my mentor, but a good friend. He and Monique have been wonderful friends to me and my wife, Sebastiana. And he is responsible for my inclusion here for the first time. And it's a privilege to be part of this August conference, of course, celebrating the remarkable legacy of Marco Biaggi. Thank you. Now, I know what a cruel guillotine master Manfred is. So I'm going, rather than sort of have presentations, incidentally, I'm BBC, born before computers, and reconstructed, unlike my old friend Anil, who seems to have adapted. So I've got talking points here that I'm going to gloss over. And the starting point, friends and colleagues, has got to be the poly-crisis that we are going through as a global village. We have seen the resurgence of so many crises in so many areas, not only with COVID, as the COVID is, of course, the most immediate, and is not really over. And this impact, as continues to be awful. We have seen in the world of work increasing unemployment, inequality, poverty, you name it. So that's where we are. And with that now has been, unfortunately, the breakdown of what I refer to as the Versailles Matratro consensus. You will recall, friends and colleagues, that that is really the basis of the social justice mandate that the ILO, has had. Now, my brief given to me suggested that I should move away from the Eurocentric kind of perspective to take into account the global South. I essentially agree with that, but I would like to put it differently. My aim is not simply to move away from Eurocentric kind of narratives, but rather to reinforce what was always the aim, and that is universality of what the ILO in particular represents. And the idea here is that it's not simply a question of going back on Eurocentric kind of approaches. I do not subscribe to the notion that everything that started in Europe has been a disaster for humanity. I mean, to start with, the very issue, the Matratro issue of consensus that arose at Versailles was a European invention, but it doesn't belong to Europe only now. This is universal civilization. These values, even though sort of brought about initially by Europeans, do not belong to the Europeans alone. And my approach here is that these are universal values. What do they represent in the labor market regulation? What has happened over the years is that the whole notion of the ILO and social justice was based on the expectation that you would have factories, they would grow, and then workers would increase. That has changed. Drastic decline across the world. In Africa, where I am, sub-Saharan Africa, many countries do not have more than 10% of the formal sector. They are all in the formal sector. Now, what do we do to ensure that collective kind of representation is realized? Because that is the linchpin. The ILO, the genius of the ILO decent work program is that fair labor standards must take place wherever work is performed. Easier said than done. And in fact, the ILO itself shoots itself in the foot, because they come up with the recommendation, what was that, 2015, to say that, we are going to formalize the informal sector. That's madness. It's futile. What we need to do is look at what can be done in terms of collective voice in the informal sector. And it's already happening. I mean, if you look at the ILO, the recent paper, or paper 86, which I'm sure most of you are aware of, looks at the possibilities in Africa, Latin America, and Asia in terms of how we can go into the informal economy and galvanize collective opinion as a form of representation. And so what you have now is a situation, the challenge now is how you do that. In the CFA, the Committee on Freedom of Association, we have recognized that issue. And in fact, we are now embarking on a system that encourages countries to enhance social dialogue at home, not only for the tripartite, traditional tripartite structure, but for the social partners as well. In South Africa, and as part of the law that Manfred Weiss was one of the architects, they have a 3+ chamber, NEDMA. And the whole idea of that, and also the idea of the workplace forums, was to try and go beyond the traditional trade union-based kind of one, not simply to eliminate the trade unions, because the trade unions, for all their declining represent more than simply their members. They represent the essence of social justice. But, and this, Manfred, who sort of know much better about that, this was the idea in South Africa. It hasn't worked as well, but the idea persists. In fact, there are attempts now to resurrect that you need to go beyond the three parties, the governments and social partners. Incidentally, not strangely, that's one area where the three constituencies are most agreed on. So what we need to do, we need to sort of, and this has got to be led. In fact, and there are people like Yanni working in this area. It's got to be led by academic evidence-based research, that this thing can be done, that you need to go beyond the formal sector. That's the reality of where the world is. And even in Europe, is declining. And one more important thing that we should note in terms of the importance of collective bargaining as a linchpin of freedom of association is that collective bargaining, collective representation, freedom of association is linked to the democratic project. And historically, that has been shown to be the case. It's been shown to be the case in Myanmar, which has gone back now. It's been shown to be the case in South Africa, Zimbabwe. It's been shown to be the case in the old Sudan. All those are now sort of receding. They are turned back on that. But had it not been for freedom of association, collective bargaining, what democracy would not really have followed, at least would not have had a place in the sun the way it did. And incidentally, it's not only global South. Think of Poland, solidarity, and how they were part and parcel of sort of pushing Poland towards democracy. So all in total, what this represents is that collective bargaining, freedom of association, and above all, because these are collective bargaining and freedom of association, is really linked to social dialogue. It's social dialogue we are talking about. How can we extend the platform of social dialogue beyond the formal sector? How can we sort of emphasize, entrench the tenets that collective bargaining and negotiations represent to feed into wider society in terms of democratic pursuit? This is what it is all about. So I think I'll stop there. And Manfred, I'm sure you are proud of me. You haven't shown me a red card. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Evans. And I think everybody has understood that the simple slogan used for such a long time now, namely formalizing the informal sector, is absolutely wrong. What we have to do is to find the specifics of the different areas of the informality and develop alternative structures beyond tripartism. And here I fully agree with my friend Evans Kalula. Well, the second speaker now will be Anil Verma. Anil Verma is professor of the University of Toronto, but telling you that he's a professor of the University of Toronto doesn't really give justice to him. He grew up in India. He is based in Brazil and in our international association, the ILERA. He is one of the leading figures. So you see, he is a very eminent speaker, and the floor is yours, Anil. Can I go there? Yeah, of course, you can do what you like. Free country.
Good morning, all. Let me begin by thanking the ADAPT team. They're a fantastic lot. They have done a wonderful job of organizing and creating this forum where we can have an exchange of ideas. But since I am under the order here of our guillotine master, Manfred Weiss, he lowers the boom. He's very good at that. I will go relatively quickly through the slides. If there is any interest, we can always come back to some of them, some of the ideas and examples during question and answer. So let me begin by saying that I call my talk the Socio-Tech Labor Policy Challenge, because in the 60s, there was a notion that social innovation and technical innovation have to come together to create the most efficient workplace. But now I see a similar challenge at the policy level as far as tackling informality in emerging economies is concerned. So let's begin with some numbers. How do I, forward, okay. So if you look at the total numbers, these are very approximate calculations that I made based on data from the ILO, the World Bank, and OECD, is about 60% of the global workforce, something in excess of 2 billion people are considered informal. And of the formal sector, you can further divide this into unionized and non-union. In other words, workers that have no voice, no formal voice, no legal protection at work. If we break this down by, sorry, did I go back? By low and middle income countries, then this proportion is even larger, because it's now almost 3/4 of the workforce. 2 billion people are informal. Just to give you an informal idea of who these workers are, very quickly, I want to say that you can think of them in two groups. Those who have an identifiable employer or a buyer of their services, so they can be an employee or a contractor, but their businesses are so small or micro enterprises that they are unregistered, and hence these workers are informal. Or you can think of domestic workers as an example. They have an employer, but they're considered informal because their workplace is not regulated in most countries. And we have just started with that process with an ILO convention. But largely, they are unprotected and unregulated, unrepresented, so they are at the bottom. Then you have another group where you cannot identify an employer because they work for themselves: street vendors, waste pickers, home-based workers, and so forth. And the ILO has done excellent work, so I recommend to you, there are 3 reports from 2002, 13, and 18 that provide a statistical picture. that is a must for anyone who wants to become familiar with who these workers are. The bad news is that it's very hard to go from one year to the next to see how things are changing over time, because the definition has been changing. Fortunately, just this year, the ILO recommendation on how to define an informal worker has just been accepted by the World Association of Labor Statisticians. So hopefully from now onwards, we'll get comparable data. And the second reference is to a report the ILO just issued that gives snapshots of how these workers are trying to find voice, how they're trying to represent themselves. So both of these references are very good. If you look at the root causes of informality, I like to think of it as a three-legged stool. There's poverty and poverty-related factors, such as education. There's exclusion by policy. In other words, labor law or any other law forgot to include them in any kind of protection. And lastly, there's evasion, even where the infrastructure exists. Either employers force workers to be informal, or workers themselves collude with the employer to go informal. So we are at a juncture in history where I think we face choices, policy choices. On one side, we have persistent and increasing informality, and that's where we are now. But we can keep going down that path, or we can make policy choices to go towards decreasing formality. So what is new? Just this week, I had a conversation with Tiziano Treo, who did a lot of pioneering work in trying to control informality in Italy through the law, etc. And he said many things they tried didn't work. And I said to him, you tried that 25 years ago, 30 years ago. The world has changed. So let's see how it has changed. Namely, I think we are upon a digital revolution that has transformed our lives, and we are all part of it. So we have smartphones, artificial intelligence, internet, algorithms. And what this results in is that we can today reach all those poor and informal workers. They have an ID. They can be given an ID that's digital, portable, verifiable. We have digital payments. We have registration. You can pick up your phone and you can register your business. We have e-commerce through which these businesses can become more formal. Now, if you haven't been to India of late, these pictures might be revealing for you, because what it shows is here is a roadside eatery, and you notice that there is a barcode. So you can buy something that costs €1 or 50 cents euro, and you can pay for it on your phone. Here is a stall that is selling little garlic and onions and spices. Here's a store that's selling toothbrush, nail clippers, and other things that you can pay with your, and even street performers have their own code. The point I want to make is that digital payments are growing in India at the rate of 30% per annum. So they are currently around 113 million transactions, but this is soon going, in the next 5 years, it'll hit 1 billion. In Brazil, during COVID-19, there was a social assistance program for the poorest people. And they were invited to apply for it through 2 apps on the phone. They were able to register 21 million poorest families, or roughly 40 to 45 million people out of the population of 200. So this is extraordinary, and it has never happened before. And this table here just shows you, in terms of digital payments, which are the leading countries, and you see India, Brazil, Thailand, China, and so forth. The point I want to make with this slide is that if we can get a handle on how to use technology to reduce informality, this would address 90% of the informal workforce today. This is a chart of China's penetration of digital payments, and you see that they're almost hitting 90%. So they have totally saturated the economy with digital. So now what do we do with digital technology? Well, the root causes that I mentioned to you, poverty, exclusion, evasion, each one of these can be fought with digital tools. So we can no longer say, no government can say today that people are informal because we don't know who they are, where they are, what they are doing, etc. The answer is yes, we have data, real-time data on these. So if we extend this argument, the theoretical prediction would be that the more digital tech, the more we can fight the causes, the less there will be informality and there would be a rise in formality. But what's the evidence? Again, a very broad generalization, but if you look at the global level, informality is flat to modestly rising. In countries like China and India, it has risen in the last 25 years as they have made economic progress. So at the cost of informality. South Africa, it's rising, but it's modestly rising. In Brazil, there have been declines, but very modest. And we are not sure if those declines will hold or whether informality will come back up. So the problem is that we are thinking of technology as an enforcement tool. That is, we have more technology, we can catch those people who are evading taxes, we can make them pay, and that would solve our problem. But what all it does is, if you physically pretend that you're pushing down that arrow, is that it increases informality as people opt out because they see formality as a cost and with no benefits. And in the developing countries, enforcement has a totally different meaning for those 2 billion people. When you're only making 1 or 2 euros a day, formality, just for the sake of being registered and for the sake of having to pay taxes, makes absolutely no sense. So we have to change this lens and this thinking. So in this three-legged stool of reducing informality, we have tech innovation, we have enforcement, but to my mind, what's missing is social policy innovation. And if we brought in social policy innovation, then enforcement would have a totally different effect. And what I would argue is that it would lead to greater formality. So I'm about to end my presentation. What can we take away? Well, think of formality as a club. Now, here's a picture of a fine club from Fortaleza that we say to informal workers, you should become formal. And the informal worker says, what's in it for me? There is a cost, but what are the benefits? And if the answer is nothing, then they don't want to join the club. So let us increase the benefits and change the lens from thinking about going from informality to formality to thinking about how can we improve the working conditions and the working lives of these people to decent work. Now, let me just give a short example, that of waste pickers. So in Brazil, there are hundreds of waste picker associations. And in some states and cities, there is a new ordinance that if you are a waste picker organized in an association, you can receive a stipend for your environmental service. In other words, it's not a wage, but it's a stipend to increase their earnings. Now you see the club concept is workers are joining these associations because they see a benefit. So what are we talking about? Social protection, subsidized housing, subsidized staples. India has a big program for subsidized staples, and hundreds of millions of people have registered for digital ID because they can access these benefits. So The challenge today is how can we innovate through social policies that would increase the benefits of formality, and that, I believe, would be a lasting solution to informality. Thank you, Madam President.
Well, thank you very much, Anil. I fully agree with what you said, but there's a big problem, of course. The effort to develop a social policy strategy, protecting those people, improving their life is okay. The problem is only if you would succeed to really develop rights for these people, we have another problem. In the formal sector, we are used to the bipolar structure employer-employee. Here we don't have this kind of bipolar structure. So the question arises, if there are rights, who is responsible to make sure that these rights are respected? For example, if you develop a health and safety structure, who is developing the kind of measures you need to have health and safety and so on? These questions are still open questions. We have to resolve them somehow. Well, but I'm not discussing now. Discussion is later. The next speaker will be Eleonora Pelisa. Eleonora Pelisa is not only a professor at the Catholic University in Argentina, she is also a member of a very prestigious research institution of the United Nations. And she will discuss with us the phenomenon of working poor. Eleonora, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Notice she's a judge.
But yeah, I forgot, she's a judge, yeah.
Okay. Firstly, I thank you, Manfred. I want to thank especially to the ADAPT team, Lavinia, Silvia, Michele, and also Margarita and Manfred for their kindness always. Well, the purpose of my presentation is to analyze the working poor phenomenon and its underlying factors in Latin America. I will basically address 4 questions: what, who, why, and how. Over the last decades, there has been a global trend in the increase of poverty and different ways of inequality around the world, but especially in my region, which has been worsened by as a consequence of the pandemic. The figure on the top shows how poverty and extreme poverty has increased in Latin America with the pandemic reaching its maximum in 2020 at the peak of the shutdowns, but has not decreased, not fallen, as you see afterwards. Extreme poverty is in red and poverty is in blue. As a consequence, by the end of 2022, more than 200 million people in Latin America live in poverty, almost more than 30%, 86 million live in extreme poverty. And these figures are even worse if we take into consideration young people under 18. 45% are poor and 20% are extremely poor. This all results in a very deeply disturbing reality. According to the FAO, 20% of the Latin American population can afford a healthy diet. These figures shows a poverty index based on the labor income. This index measures the percentage of households in which average member earn less than $1.90 daily. This shows that even though there was less in work poverty in 2021, indicated in blue, in comparison with the pandemic period, the green dots that you see, labor poverty has raised during the employment recovery in 2022. So Although paid work in my region and around the world is the main way of subsistence, and for example, in Latin America, 80% of the total income comes from work, a third part of our population live in poverty, which live in poverty or extreme poverty suffers that are workers. So we can say that work is not guarantee to overcome poverty. This is a new type of poverty because it implies the sociological expansion to segments or workers that used to belong or have traditionally been part of the middle class, and for different reasons, economic reasons, or for the new dynamics of the labor market, at that risk of becoming poor, were poor. As poverty that can be defined in different ways, in absolute terms, in monetary terms, or relative terms, the working poor concept is a hybrid concept that can be analyzed from several perspectives, given the combination of factors ranging from, for example, the labor environment, low salaries, job quality, segmentation, also taking into account the economy, the distribution of wealth and its impact in development, also the social security, for example, the efficiency of the social security system, the minimum wage salaries policy, and above all, also taking into consideration social exclusion and poverty. For the paper, we considered the standard international poverty line of $1.90 because it's considered the minimum amount needed to cover the cost of basic food, clothing, and shelters. Well, what are the causes, the whys, the factors and dynamics? There are, of course, different factors and dynamics that cause this phenomenon, the working poor phenomenon, without ignoring the influence or incidence of other well-known factors related within work poverty, for example, gender, age, demographic features. I'm going to consider 5 that I think they are pivotal in our region: the structural heterogeneity and productivity gaps, and the labor market features, informality, under-occupation, labor precariousness, the lack of education or low workforce skills, and economic aspects such as the low growth and the high inflation. Let's go with the first. The structural heterogeneity and productivity gaps. One of the main features of Latin American is that its productivity structure is the heterogeneity given by the productivity gaps and the technological asymmetries among the predominant economic units that cause or lead to a very low labor productivity. I like central economies like the USA, Canada, Germany, which have shown a trend to homogenization. Latin American economies have enhanced heterogeneity, more fragmentation, which caused that more and more sectors of the economy were disconnected or cutting off from the rest of the economy. That leads also to an unequal distribution of the income. Some scholars suggest that this heterogeneity or fragmentation of the productive system is a consequence of the way that the region's economy is inserted into the global market and its capacity or low capacity to promote technical changes among the different production areas. So we have this structure is made up of a very primitive sector, a predominant one, with the productivity and income that merely allows subsistence, an intermediate sector of industries with the productivity on the average of the national system, and a mother sector with a productivity that's equal to developed countries. What's happened here? We have to say that the most of the working poor works in poor companies. These companies carry out activities with a very low productivity that they are related with family strategies of subsistence. So it's evident that these productive units only can generate a very low income, both for their workers and also for their owners. In our region, a worker generates a production level around $10,500. That means an average monthly age of $430,000. In Japan, for example, this number is 50,000, or in, for example, United States, 40,000. Also, statistics show that sector where productivity grows take a very small part of the portion of the employment. So the increase in the productivity on the salary can be, benefit to take advantage of many workers. Let's talk about, again, informality. The working poor phenomenon is no doubt related with informality and labor precarious condition. Informality actually is a structural feature of the Latin American economy, as Anil has said. More than 50% of the workers, Latin American workers, work in informal conditions. This means that 1 out of 2 workers work in the informal sector. At this point, we have to say that for the working poor, informality is an alternative to unemployment. The informal economy takes up a lot of plenty of workers that otherwise wouldn't have the chance to have a job. Indeed, in 2022, the modest recovery of the labor markets in our region was driven by informal occupation, which represented more than 60% of the total job position created. So this informal sector is made up of 30% of informal wage earners. These figures ranging from, for example, 17 in Chile percent to more than 45 in Mexico, Nicaragua, or Colombia, and 23% of informal no-wage earners. These figures also ranging from, for example, less than 20% in Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile, to more than 35% in Nicaragua, Mexico, Venezuela. What is the relationship between informality and in-work poverty? Informality entails a wage penalty that is reflected in a lower income per hour for workers under this condition. If you see the chart that says wage penalty, this figure shows the less amount of labor income an informal worker earns with respect to another worker carrying out the same duties in the formal sector. In other terms, how much a worker loses for being informal working in comparison to its formal counterpart. This wage penalty, as we see with the negative numbers, ranges among between 20 and 35%. The pie chart shows how poverty is made up. As you see, 50% of the poor are informal wage earners, and almost 30% are informal non-wage earners. That is, 80% of the informal workers are poor in Latin America. This chart shows, as an example, the composition in work poverty by the status in the employment. For example, regarding the informal wage earners indicated in gray, the percentage of labor poverty is around 22% in Brazil, 28% in Argentina, and 29% in Paraguay. But if we consider both informal wage earners and informal no-wage earners, they represent, of the working poor, 73% the poverty in Brazil, 68% in Argentina, and 94% in Paraguay. Another cause, another dynamic factor, the low level of qualification, the worker qualifications. The level of Latin American workforce skills are still low in comparison with the developed countries. In most of the countries of the region, the workers with the low skill of qualifications are still prevailing in the adult population. This low level of skills and competence entails problems of employability and productivity. Employability, because companies are requiring skills or competencies that human resources do not have. And productivity, as an example, in Latin America, the productivity base in human resources is 0.75 in relation to the average of productivity of the United States. This means that using the same number of resources, capital, workplace, technology, the production of our region will be still 25% lower than the United States. The difference is on the qualification of the workforce. So there's a relationship between at the level of education and poverty, work poverty. For example, one can quote again Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. By the end of 21, this is ILO data, the portion of working poor with basic education was around 30% in Argentina and Paraguay, and 20 on the 20s in Brazil. But if we see the impact of poverty in workers with complete higher education was less than 10% in Argentina, Paraguay, and only 2% in Brazil. Another factor, Latin America is one of the regions that most struggles, has more difficulties in long-term growth. The ILO has estimated that Latin America economic growth is in a rate of 2.7. What it means? It means that it will take more than 30 years to the economy to double its size. And what's more important, it means that the Latin American standard of living, the GDP per capita, could eventually double in 100 years at this rate. I'm not going to say it. So this low economic growth activity entails also a slowdown in the employment growth. It's estimated only 2% in 2022 and only 1% employment growth in 2024. This goes also has a direct impact on the income. As you see, 20% of the Latin America live with less than $3 and almost 35% with less than $5. Another thing, the impact on inflation. Our region also have the highest levels of inflation, which affects not only salary, in particular the food component of the basic food basket of vulnerable and middle income social class. This figure shows that since the second semester of 2020, for various reasons, the conflict between the Russian Federation, Ukraine, the pandemic, and also the money issue to fund aid programs, inflation has increased in all countries on the region, and it reached its highest peak since 2008. The annual inflation for this rate for 2023, is, I am afraid of Manfred, is almost 10. That's also have a direct impact in the income because workers have to work harder and harder to, live. I don't have much time, so I want to say something. We can make a lot of, we have challenges and proposals, but I understand there will be a space for further discussion, but policy to reducing work poverty or poverty or the worker poor phenomenon in Latin America have failed always because we treat the symptoms, not the disease. If we can imagine that the productive system or the labor market is a body to be treated that is ill, we have to tackle the disease, not only the symptoms. So as we treat fever and pneumonia or bronchitis, we need to attack the disease. We need vaccines. As Anil said, programs, tailor-made policies, and a cultural change, what Anil was saying, was telling you. Just to end, I came from a very poor region, and I know and I believe that these words pronounced by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Nelson Mandela they were so transcendent and important at that time as they are today. True individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous man, needed man are not free men. And like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural, it's man-created and can be overcome and eradicated by action of human beings. Remember that overcoming poverty is not a task of charity, it's an act of justice. Thank you very much. Sorry, Manfred.
Thank you very much, Eleonora. You really have shown us the different elements in the dynamics of bringing up something like the phenomenon of working poor. And you have shown us also the link between informal economy and the working poor. And I think from what we have heard from you, well, perhaps education, qualification might be the most important pillar we have to look at for the future to overcome this phenomenon. Well, now we are going from Argentina to Japan, and we have our colleague
Shingo
Ikeda. And Shingo Ikeda is coming from the very prestigious, certainly known to all of you, Japanese Institute of Labor Policy and Training. And I had the privilege to work with this institute throughout my career, you know, fantastic. So the floor is yours. You will tell us about the replacement now of something where we thought this will never change, namely the lifelong employment pattern in Japan. But even this now is changing. So we can see that even Japan is now a country where we can say things are fluid and they are no longer as they were. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm very happy to hear today. And so he introduced me. I'm a researcher of the Labor Institute of Japanese government. So my presentation title is Present Job Changes under the under the Japanese long-term employment practice. So as the chairman said, lifelong employment, the long-term employment is the same words, the same meaning. So some audience knows that the Japanese long-term employment practice means the continuous employment from the youth to old age, and the employers are expected to continue to employ workers from the new graduate to the mandatory retirement. It's the age of the 60. And it is very typical in the among the large companies in Japan. So this kind of the employment practice was praised as a source of the high productivity of Japanese company in the background of the high economic growth in late 20s. So many years ago. And today, contrary to that, this employment practice is criticized as the source of long-term stagnation of Japanese economy. And some government policymakers and economists stress the active job changes, promoting the job changing to activate the labor market in terms of economic revitalization. So, but actually, based on our data analysis, there are already the fluid employment labor market for full-time workers in Japan, typically found in the service sectors. So, however, job changes are still disadvantageous economically, even in the fluid employment labor market. This result means the long-term employment is still advantageous for most workers in Japan. So the labor market replacement is very difficult in Japan. Yeah, okay. Okay, I will show you some result of our original data analysis. So, so this is the job turnover rate of the first job. So based on the Japanese traditional long-term employment practice, so the workers will not change their jobs till the old age. But, sorry. But, but the service sectors like the wholesales, retails, and services showed the 75.3% of the workers changed their jobs, and medical care, education, and technical services also about 70% young workers changed their jobs. So this means the new types of labor market emerge in the Japanese labor market with the increasing the service economy. And this is the age of the entry into the current employment of job changes by in the industries. So far, the manufacturing sectors, so the entry age is younger, even among the job changers. But pay attention to the service sectors like the medical care, education, and technical services, and wholesale, retail, and other service industry. The entry age is older than the manufacturing industry. And there are some people enter the current employment around 40 years of age. So that we can find the two types of the full-time workers labor market at large company. The one is the traditional long-term employment labor market. It is still deep-rooted, typically in the manufacturing industries. But we can find another labor market of the large company. That is, we named it the fluid employment labor market. That's very typical in the service industries. So we can find the job turnover even in the middle age. But however, the new type of the fluid employment labor market not so decent. Because the job changes in the fluid employment labor market income is lower than the one in the long continuous workers. So this implies the job changing is disadvantageous even in the fluid employment labor market. To understand this, our result of analysis more clearly, we can classify the 4 aspects of labor market in Japan. So the traditional Japanese employment practice was very placed in background of the high economic growth. So the worker make their vocational career by moving in the internal labor market. And their wage is raising as they work longer in the same company. So we named the kind of the labor mobility a spiral mobility. Yeah, like that. But today's Japanese employment practice is not so heavy growth. So the worker make their vocational career still in the internal labor market, but wage not so increasing. So we call the kind of labor mobility circulate mobility. You know the air circulator, just rolling, just moving, but not rising. So the Japanese government and some economics stress the new type of the spiral mobility labor market outside the in the external labor market. That the green one is the expectation. But in fact, the actual labor job changing is the circulate mobility of the external labor market. Its wage is not so high, and it is very difficult to expect the wages rising. So we are wondering if this kind of new labor market is just only a new type of secondary labor market. So it's very important problem to discuss in Japan, because it means the expanding the service sector means expanding the new kind of the secondary labor market. It's not good for the people's wealth. So here the conclusion. As you know, there are coexisting two types of the full-time workers labor market in Japan. One is the traditional labor, long-time employment labor market, typically among manufacturing industries. But we can find the new type of the fluid employment labor market, typically among the service industry. But job changes are economical disadvantages even in the fluid employment labor market. We are wondering such kind of expanding service economy means the expanding second labor market, low wage labor market expanding. We must investigate more deeply today. Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you, Shingu.
Yes.
For showing us how a real traditional old pattern, which was made more or less in stone, you know, is breaking away, and flexibility and mobility is increasing. And we will see what will be the result, in particular for those who are the actors in these kind of fluid labor market. Well, I think, first of all, we should be grateful to our speakers for not only having shown us such interesting phenomena, but for having kept with enormous discipline the time, which means we have now more or less half an hour of time for discussion. And when I say discussion, I hate the notion Q&A, you know, because we are not only asking questions and giving answers, we have also critical comments, you know, so don't hesitate. I don't want to structure the discussion. I simply would like to say one thing. We have listened to our four speakers. We have not heard any indication that we are moving towards a workless society. What we are doing is we will have hopes that the kind of jobs we have now, which are problematic in the informal economy, in particular the working poor, might move towards a level of decent work. And we also hope that the people who are now in the fluid labor market in Japan will not fall down, but will keep the level or improve the level. That's the kind of message we get, not the workless society. But having said this, I would like to open the discussion. Who is the icebreaker?
Yeah.
Don't hesitate.
Yes, I see a hand there.
The problem is I don't see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, is there a microphone? Yeah, you get the microphone as far as I can see. Yeah, that's the best. Yeah, come here. Don't worry, don't worry. Okay, go ahead.
We have to be very courageous to ask questions. I was very interested in the presentation on in-work poverty, in particular, better understanding the root of in-work poverty. But I understand them in a very traditional way, as you presented, as lack of training, as lack of productive skills and productivity. And I'm very concerned about this narrative of putting the wrong on those who are not skilled enough in a productive way. So it's victimizing them even more. And my question is, does it really make sense to only speak about, give poor people more productive skills if at the end of the day, the housings, the price for housing, the price for the food or inflation and the cost of living is rising? So what about tackling for in-work poverty the roots of inflation? And I think some very productive activities such as speculation in food, speculation in housing sectors are also generating in-work poverty. So to me, it would be important to change the narrative about saying that you are poor because you're not productive enough in another narrative of you're poor because some person make profits and that which have consequences on the cost of living. So I think that would be very interesting. And this is, by the way, a new discussion on post-growth theories that we have traditionally. Thank you.
Very much. And you want to? Okay, go ahead. He wants.
Okay. No, I think that I can address, Manfred, your question, and also partially this one, and then Eleonora can speak. I think that to crack this problem, this mass of informal workers, including the working poor, is not to think of the formal employment as the goal and then try to get there in one step through a legislation or through regulation. The one right that I would put ahead of safety and work, like Manfred, you mentioned, and that is hugely problematic. We have regulations now, laws about domestic work, impossible to enforce, impossible, because the workplace is so fragmented and it's a home. That's the workplace. So how do you do surprise inspections, etc.? No, I would start further back and go to the idea of worker voice, collective voice. I think the one right where you start solving this problem is to change the law to enable worker voice, and not just the law. In fact, if I put on my radical hat, governments should have outreach into these communities to assist formation of worker organizations. Waste pickers in Brazil, we have done a lot of field work. There are hundreds of associations, all struggling. None of them have any rights under the law. They happened because the Lula administration, through a decree, allowed these to form and provided some resources, but it's very shaky. I would like to, not being a lawyer, to speak to my legal scholar colleagues and say, why not go back to the constitutional level, embed a right that anybody who performs useful work in society has a right to a collectivity. Once you have a collectivity, the workers will then find their way. It will not happen overnight, but I tell you, poor people might be poor, but they're not stupid about their rights. Once they learn their rights, and if there's a vehicle to exercise, they would do it, and the world will change.
Thank you. Eleonora.
Well, Anil has speak better than me. I agree with you. I think that it's not only, education or skills, it's also inflation. But I think that also governments are bad welfare managers. That's the reality. When I talk about tackling the disease, is that, for example, today is inflation. Okay, but we have this phenomenon of the working poor without inflation. So the problem is not only, it's, a little bit of everything: inflation, informality, lack of education. I try to present the link between those problems and the phenomenon of the working poverty. But I think the problem in Latin America are, I speak generally, the governments, the structure, and the policies, because we have a very important here in European Union. You have a new directive about minimum wages. The majority of the countries of Latin America have policy of minimum wages. They didn't solve the problem. So I don't say that it doesn't work. Yes, and we need it because it would be worse without a policy of minimum wages. But when I was talking again about the disease, I think we need what you say, these vaccines. What are the vaccines? A cultural change, collective bargaining. Here, the poor people, because if the 80% of the people, 60% of the people from Latin America are poor, we have to hear them, what they have to say. And it is a problem. I think, I don't know how to say in English, voluntarism. Can you say voluntarism? It's very, in a continental way, Argentina, maybe Brazil, Chile, we thought with the labor law will solve everything. Okay, we have rights. As Anil said, we have laws about domestic labor and all of this stuff, and the law will solve everything. It's not the law, it's the enforcement. Is the efficiency of the system. So I agree with you. I think we need a global approach and tailor-made strategies. Today is inflation. 20 years ago, there was no inflation in Latin America, and we still have the problem because this is a structural problem. We have to change our mind culturally. It's not easy.
Who else? Yeah, here. Go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentations. And unfortunately, I have to address to only one of you, Mr. from Japan. I was very fascinated by your presentation, and maybe to clarify, because and maybe you mentioned it, but then I missed it. When we talk about mobility on the labor market, of course, there's a huge difference between what we call involuntary mobility, because you're unemployed, become unemployed, and voluntary mobility. And I see Japan as a country of full employment. Traditionally, we always looked at Japan, full employment. And in a country of full employment, normally, you have more voluntary mobility, because people see, well, there are jobs available, so we move. And in that case, I would think people move voluntarily to get a better job, salary or other things. So I missed that a little bit in your presentation, but maybe you have to clarify between voluntary mobility and involuntary mobility, because in my view, that's a very big difference. Thank you.
Want to answer right away?
Yeah, it's very big question. Sorry. The traditional Japanese labor market stress the stay on the same job and make their career inside the one company. And so the kind of the mobility means the personal changing of the jobs inside the internal labor market in company. And so Japanese labor contracts don't define the job when the employer hire the workers, and they assign the job very flexibility. And so the traditional Japanese long-term employment means the kind of labor mobility inside one company. But recently, the job change is increasing, particularly among the young person and middle-aged person. And this kind of labor mobility is so very petty and uncertain. It's very uncertain existence for researcher and the government. So we now focus on the what kind of mobility can find in the external labor market. And so some people try to change the job to raise their wages, but actually, why it's very hard to most workers to find a better job by changing the job. The reason probably there's no high growth industry in Japan. For example, the IT. We focus on the professional service, like the medical and educational and technical services. In the advanced country, such industry is very shows a very high growth, like the UK and the United States and Germany. But in Japan, the kind of the service is not so strong, and so this is I think this is the main reason why the
Okay,
And-
thank you. There was another question. Yeah, would you come up here? Okay.
It's intimidating for people.
Sorry for making it so difficult, but we don't have a
Exercise.
microphone. Okay, go
Thank
ahead.
you very much, Manfred. Thank you very much for those really great speeches. My question was around thinking about connections between the formal and informal economies. And I wonder if you could comment in relation to the countries that you've looked at on the role or the possible links with transnational capital and their role, for example, in influencing those sectors, and also how they might be looked at as a critical actor in any solutions to these problems.
Thank you. You want?
Well, very briefly, there are huge connections between the informal economy and the formal. Know this, that the global economy from which we, especially those of us in this room, we are educated, we have jobs, and we have comfortable lives. Our standard of living is hugely subsidized by this informal economy. And if it weren't for this informal economy, China wouldn't have grown so fast. And this is another line of inquiry and research that radical economists from the Marxist tradition are doing, and they're trying to quantify. But from an industrial relations point of view, which is my expertise, what we see are that these linkages to the formal economy are vehicles for organizing these workers. So, for example, waste pickers in several cities in India have been successfully organized because they use their connections to the formal economy to agitate for their rights They've been able to form unions. They've been able to negotiate. And at least in a few large cities, this movement has spread. It is still only a drop in the bucket. So I don't want to claim that this is a big movement. But everywhere you see, for example, in garments, this effort that the ILO is also involved in, Better Work, the connection is from the formal economy to the informal, to then say, look, you are subsidizing the formal economy, therefore you have some obligations. You have the privilege, in exchange for this you have some obligations. And those obligations translate into giving these workers a better shake. Fair trade movement, for example, fair trade in coffee, to return more of the price that we pay for coffee back to the farmer. And so there are hundreds of such movements. But what we don't have is a more unified policy approach. And if this were better codified internationally and nationally, then we will see movement.
Very good. Is there another?
We pay for coffee back to the farm.
No. What is that?
That was my recording.
Yeah.
Just coming back from space.
Somebody want to
Reflect.
intervene?
Reflect.
Margarita, do you help me to see?
I think our PhD students are a little bit shy today,
Or
but
They can stand up and speak.
I'd like to ask a question to Eleonora. Eleonora, I agree with you. Qualification is not everything. It's only one aspect, but it's an important aspect. And as far as I know, you might correct me, in the countries you are covering in Latin America, you do have the institutions of education in any respect. The problem is the access to the institution. Could you tell us a little bit, what are the reasons why so many people do not have access to these institutions? And are there trends to improve this?
Yes. Actually, according to the ILO, Latin America is the region of the world with the highest educational gaps. There are a lot of differences between the ones that could attend, to, for example, to university, the one to go to only primary school. Over the last decades, 20 years, there have been some improvements in the access to, according to ACD, to the access to education. I believe the problem is a cultural one, because you learn with someone that helps you in the same place of your work. So this is changing. I don't want to spoil, but I have a later presentation about education in Spanish, about education. There are very interesting initiatives. One is SENAI in Brazil. It's a technical institution. Also in Peru and Argentina and in Colombia, that try to revert this phenomenon, the link between the school, the access to the school and to the work, like aprendizato or some kind of apprenticeship, because there's a problem with that, as you say. I believe is something cultural in that way. Why I study? Because I don't enter to the labor market, so I learn how to do my work with in informal economy. So I don't need to study. They want to revert this. And other thing, the programs, the low skills is a product of we are studying something that the market is not requiring.
Yeah, but you are only referring now to the universities. But what about vocational training?
We don't have vocational training. We don't have vocational training. It's a very few institutes. I named SENAI because SENAI had vocational training. SENA in Colombia had vocational training from it's about, for example, 5 years now. SENA exists almost 40 years ago. They make the change. I came from a country with a lot of immigration, and the dream of my grandparents is, okay, go to the university, be a doctor. You have to understand that everybody can be a doctor, a lawyer, or something. You can be something else, like German culture or education system, the dual, But in some countries, I don't know if Anil agreed with me, from South America, if you say to someone, okay, not everybody can go to the university. Maybe you need a vocational in the meantime, or maybe that sounds like discrimination. You know what I mean? And sometimes, for example, it's statistical. Only 45% of the Latin American youngest ends secondary school, and you are thinking in university. So that's the problem. That's a real problem.
You want to comment on that?
Yeah, this is a problem of the developing economies, and that is that our educational systems are not responsive to the labor market. So this is what you do very well in Germany, for example. In Canada, we come close. We do better than many other countries, but not as well as in Germany. That is, when the labor market evolves and changes, there are demands for new skills. You need educational institutions that would pivot. And it's very hard. A lot of them are ossified. They have old ways of governance. So unless you free up the educational institutions to be able to respond, and it doesn't have to be a strict two-track, the vocational versus university. The market will sort this out. A lot of our young people in Canada, today they finish university and then they go back to a college to do a 6-month or 12-month diploma in computer animation or petroleum technology or wherever the job market is, so that they have the university education, then they get marketable skills, then they go in. So the market takes care of that, but you have to free up the educational institutions, allow them to be responsive. And I think that's the way to go.
Thank you. We would have time for one more question or comment.
Here at the back.
Is there? Okay. Could you come? Okay.
Good morning. I feel every time super shy speaking in front of all these people, but I was thinking about the presentation of Dr. Pelisa about the poverty with work, etc. And well, of course, economical factors do have effects on the labor law, but I was thinking about the structural effects on cultural also being so. I was thinking about in Italy, for example, the most in poverty workers are women. And I think that this is not just about Italy, but it's all about everywhere. So maybe, I mean, you're right about the cultural aspects. And I think like that maybe right now we should think how to put women to have access to an equal labor world. And okay, training are important, but before that, how women can have access to an equity educational field. So, okay, everything is important, but before that, there are like the majority of the population around the world that still can't work, still don't earn money for working. So maybe we should focus about women and just about them.
Okay, thank you. If you know what, a short answer because we don't have.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you. Not only I agree with your perspective. I think that there's a problem also in not only in Italy, also in Latin America. And if you have, for example, 10 jobs possibly the jobs, that 7 are taken by men and only maybe 3 by women, according to the ILO. Yes.
Manfred, can I just,
Yeah.
30 seconds? One thing I want to point out is that when we talk about informality, there is the old informality, which is what I was talking about mostly. That is people who were never part of the system. They were never included by policy. But there is also the new informality, which is workers who a generation ago were formal. And now because of technology and various employer practices, various evasion practices, they have been pushed down to either becoming informal or to the edges of formality. And from a research point of view, it's a wonderful laboratory, I think, where you can test policy innovations. That is, target some of these groups, including the last point about women. Let's identify which industries those women are. And I would again like to emphasize that the place to start is to enable their voice. I used to say, give them voice, until a female colleague pointed out to me that they have voice. You can't give them voice. You just have to enable it. So enable voice and do it sector by sector so that it's a granular approach. It's not like a big hammer that you apply to all women.
Very,
Thank you.
very long 30 seconds. Okay, well, I think we have heard today quite a bit about the status quo in the area of informal sector in Japan and, well, in Latin America, where we have the problem of the working poor. And we have also heard quite a bit on where we want to go. We have not heard, how did I say, much hope that this will be quickly done. It will be an incremental process, and we have to be very patient, I think. Well, nevertheless, I would like to thank all our speakers for their very interesting presentations, for their discipline. And I also would like all of you for having been here, and in particular those who have participated in the discussion. Now I think I don't keep you away any longer from lunch, otherwise you will start to punish me, and I don't want to be punished. Okay.
And let me just say a special thanks also to Professor Manfred Weiss for chairing exceptionally this session. Just practical information.